Today we speak of a cold coffin. No apology, no truth, only a lifeless body returned in silence. Yet it was in that moment that an entire nation awoke, and from that anger, a fire of resistance is spreading across West Africa. His name was Alino Faso, but to his loved ones, he was born Ibrahim Traoré, not a soldier. He carried no gun, but he fought with the sharpest weapons of our time: truth, patriotism, and a keyboard on social media. Alino's voice crossed borders. He spoke up for the forgotten. He defended the honor of a nation, and he chose to stand by President Ibrahim Traoré at a time when Burkina Faso faced enemies both within and without. For many, that choice made him a target. In January of this year, while in Abidjan, the capital of Ivory Coast, Alino was arrested. No public charges, no visitation rights, only darkness. 6 months later, on July 24th, the devastating news came. The Ivorian authorities claimed he had committed suicide in prison, slashed his wrists, hanged himself with a bedsheet. But in Burkina Faso, no one believed it, not because they refused to accept his death, but because they understood too well what power can do when truth becomes a threat. And then, a week later, Alino's body was returned to Ouagadougou. No explanation, no medical records, no apology from Ivory Coast, only a cold coffin, lowered into the earth amid a mother's tears and the cries of justice for Alino in the streets. The question now is, was this merely a personal tragedy, or the final straw for a continent betrayed too many times? If this story brings back memories of your own family, share them. If you are praying for justice in Burkina Faso, speak the name of someone specific. And if you believe that one voice can awaken an entire continent, then stay with this story. Everything began in January 2025. Alino Faso set foot in Abidjan, the capital of Ivory Coast, on a personal trip, but less than 3 days after his arrival. He was arrested. No summons from the court, no press conference to inform the public, only a vague statement from the authorities claiming Alino was under investigation for connections with foreign powers. At the time, many believed he would soon be released, but then a week passed, then a month, 6 months, no visits allowed, no hearings, not a single photo proving he was alive. His family was denied contact. The government of Burkina Faso submitted a formal request for consular access, denied. State media in Ivory Coast maintained absolute silence. And then, on the morning of July 24th, a simple announcement appeared on the government's website. Alino Faso was dead, according to the statement. He had been found in his cell, blood flowing from his wrists, his body hanging from a bedsheet tied to the iron frame of the ceiling. They called it suicide, but in Burkina Faso, no one believed this explanation, because people knew well, when someone is locked in darkness for too long, death rarely comes from their own hands. That very day, thousands of Burkinabés poured into the streets of Ouagadougou. They carried Alino's photo, the national flag, and one single demand: truth at Sankara Square. An elderly woman spoke through a loudspeaker, her voice trembling yet resolute. "We lost Thomas Sankara to silence. We will not lose Alino the same way." The protesters were not calling for war. They were calling for justice, but anger was rising, undeniable and unstoppable. The government of Burkina Faso acted immediately. President Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national television, his face tense, his words slow and deliberate. He officially rejected Abidjan's suicide narrative. He called it an act of political assassination and demanded that the government of Ivory Coast, within 48 hours, disclose all details of the case, allow an independent forensic investigation, and hand over the body to Burkina Faso. His words were clear: without truth, there will be no silence. But 48 hours passed. No explanation, no investigation, no diplomatic statement from Ivory Coast. The only thing Ouagadougou received was a transport plane carrying a sealed coffin, landing without ceremony, without farewell. A senior Burkina officer later recounted that when they opened the coffin in a cold room, they did not just see the body of a citizen. They saw an insult. No forensic documents, no medical report, only a young man, face pale, arms bearing stitched wounds, neck marked with bruises. His family was not allowed an independent examination. No one was allowed to ask why. When the news spread, Ouagadougou erupted in fury. In Bobo Dioulasso, a march of more than 20,000 people carried banners reading, "No truth, no peace." In the north, civic groups organized collective prayers, invoking the names of Alino Faso and Thomas Sankara as two martyrs, inside Parliament. Lawmakers unanimously demanded the withdrawal of all diplomatic staff from Abidjan within just 3 days. Burkina Faso recalled its ambassador, froze all diplomatic exchanges, canceled every bilateral meeting, and deployed forces to secure the southern border from a death in the shadows. The situation had transformed into a regional crisis, but above all, the people of Burkina Faso were not afraid. They believed that Alino's death was not the end. It was the beginning of an awakening, with Alino Faso's body now laid to rest. The situation in Burkina Faso has not calmed. It has swelled like a storm about to break. What began as a demand for transparency has transformed into a sweeping political declaration. Burkina Faso will not bow before the insult of any nation, especially not an African nation behaving like an extension of colonial power. On national television, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared for the second time in 4 days, not in uniform, not inside a conference room. He stood surrounded by a circle of young soldiers, holding a dossier stamped in red, the Alino file. His eyes locked onto the camera. He did not shout. He did not call for war, but he left no room for doubt. If the blood of a Burkina citizen can be shed in silence, then our blood has become too cheap, and a people with cheap blood cannot hold land, nor can they hold honor. Immediately after that speech, a series of decisive actions followed. The Ministry of Defense ordered special defense units to the southern border. Checkpoints rose along every road connecting Burkina Faso to Ivory Coast. Every cargo truck was inspected. Every Ivorian passport holder was required to declare their reason for entry. This was no longer vigilance. This was readiness. Meanwhile, across Burkina Faso's cities, people did not wait for the state to act. They organized themselves. In Ouagadougou, young men wearing black armbands walked through neighborhoods distributing flyers that read, "Truth for Alino, Honor for the Nation." In Bobo Dioulasso, churches and mosques held interfaith prayers. An imam declared openly, "When a voice is silenced for speaking patriotism, silence becomes complicity." On social media, Alino's old videos resurfaced and spread by the millions in one clip. He declared, "No one can make us feel small on our own land unless we allow it." Those words are now printed on T-shirts, pasted on walls, written on classroom blackboards, in death. Alino became a symbol, not because he was a politician, but because he was an ordinary citizen. And the silence forced upon him has made millions refuse to stay silent any longer. The movement quickly crossed borders. In Mali, thousands marched carrying Alino's portrait alongside President Traoré's image and the AES flag. In Niamey, students painted murals of Alino holding a pen high against the desert sky. Beneath the words, "To die for truth is worth more than to live in lies." Hashtags, "Justice for Alino" and "Africa is awake" spread from Senegal to Kenya. Inside Ivory Coast, pressure mounted. Independent journalists demanded transparency. Opposition figures criticized President Alassane Ouattara for his prolonged silence, accusing him of making the country appear as a leftover colony. Yet the Abidjan government remained cold. No apology, no investigation, no comment. That silence became the final straw. Burkina Faso announced it would present the case to a Pan-African legal commission, calling for an international investigative body under African, not Western, human rights supervision. They vowed to bring the matter before the African Union as a precedent, a test of the continent's self-respect. Traore is not alone. Burkina Faso is not alone. Those who once stayed silent are now standing, not to seek revenge, but to affirm one truth. No voice should be killed without others rising to speak in its place. And no African nation should fear loving itself more than it fears the comfort of false peace. The death of Alino Faso is not merely a diplomatic incident. It has seeped into the soil, the streets, the schools, and the markets of Burkina Faso. Because Alino was not a distant politician. He was one of them. He spoke like them. He lived like them. And he died, as so many had died before him, in silence. But this time, the people refused to let silence repeat itself. Just 3 days after Alino's body was returned, Burkina Faso's Ministry of Education announced that his story would be added to the national civic curriculum for secondary schools, from Ouagadougou to Kaya. Students were tasked with analyzing, why can a voice without weapons be seen as a threat? One teacher told the state newspaper that for the first time in years, her students asked to stay an extra half-hour in class just to debate about Alino. The Ministry of Culture launched a nationwide youth art competition under the theme, Voices Do Not Die. The grand prize was a full university scholarship and the chance to perform at Africa Unity Day. Thousands of entries poured in: paintings, poetry, rap songs, street theater. Children who once knew nothing of politics were now chanting Alino's name in their lyrics. And they did not sing with fear. They sang with faith. The government also seized the moment to define a new policy. Sovereignty is not an abstract word. President Traore issued a decree establishing the National Sovereignty Commission. Its mission: to review all colonial and post-colonial international treaties Burkina Faso had ever signed. Any clause undermining national self-determination would be cancelled or renegotiated. Speaking before Parliament. The foreign minister declared, "We cannot demand justice for one man while keeping commitments that harm 20 million others." At the local level, civil organizations began hosting community dialogues in Gawa. A group of rural women invited scholars to lecture on independent media and the role of youth. A 60-year-old mother asked, "If I don't understand why they killed Alino, how can I protect my grandson who wants to start a blog about his country?" Questions once ignored had become central to public life. The military, too, did not stand aside. During a memorial parade, a colonel read out the name of Alino Faso as though he were a fallen soldier, not because he fought with a rifle, but because he was killed for loyalty to his nation. Young soldiers stood upright, right hands over their chests. They did not shout. They did not salute. They stood in silence. And in that silence, unity spoke louder than any slogan in media. The state sponsored local radio stations to broadcast Alino's old recordings. A nightly program titled The Voice Lives On went on air. Listeners could call in, share reflections, send messages to his family, or recount the first time they heard Alino speak. One father phoned from the northern countryside, saying, "I don't understand politics fully, but if loving Burkina Faso is a crime, then perhaps I too am a criminal." The death of Alino Faso, with all its cruelty and coldness, achieved what no propaganda campaign ever could. It reawakened the bond between nation and dignity. The people did not wait for the government. They acted, not to overthrow, but to affirm, No one can harm a Burkinabe citizen and then turn away. In this crisis, state and people are looking in the same direction, not toward war, but toward justice. Not justice for revenge, but justice to ensure that no one else will ever die forgotten. Like Alino. As Burkina Faso blazed like a wildfire, the world began to take notice, but not through action, through hesitation. Major television networks in France, the UK, and the US ran only a single short line about the death of Alino Faso. No analysis, no investigative reports. It seemed that the death of an African citizen, no matter how suspicious, was still not important enough to claim Western prime-time coverage. But Africans in the diaspora did not stay silent. In Paris, hundreds gathered outside the French Parliament, holding banners that read, "We know where you stand in this story." In Washington, African activists submitted a petition to the U.S. Congress, demanding clarification on whether the U.S. government had funded or supported regimes involved in silencing dissenting voices in West Africa. One American congressman told the press, "If we claim to support democracy, then our silence right now betrays that principle." Within the African Union, the AES Alliance, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso signed a joint declaration calling for an international investigation into Alino's death, stressing, "No African nation should be treated as though the lives of its citizens have no value." On the other side, however, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, maintained a neutral stance. No condemnation, no objection, only calls to remain calm and respect dialogue channels. Questions began to echo everywhere. Are some African governments being shielded by global powers in order to suppress domestic voices? Did colonialism ever truly end, or did it simply change its form? And if an activist can be eliminated in silence without anyone held accountable, does democracy in Africa truly exist? July 24th. A body was returned. But what was awakened was not fear. It was collective memory, collective honor, and a rage that no one wished to bury any longer. Burkina Faso is not only mourning a fallen son, it is asking again the most fundamental question: who truly controls the destiny of African nations? And who will speak when justice is strangled in the dark? That question is not only for Ivory Coast, not only for France or the United States. It is for each one of us. Do we accept living in a world where the death of a patriot is reduced to a statistic? Do we believe peace can exist if truth is distorted? President Traoré has announced that a statue will be built in Ouagadougou to honor Alino Faso. July 24th will be written into textbooks as the day a citizen was killed for loving his country, but more than a monument. Alino has left behind a legacy that cannot be erased, the courage to speak the truth, even when it cost him his life. And now, we stand at a crossroads. One path is forgetfulness, turning away, continuing to live under an order imposed by others. The other is to walk the unfinished road Alino chose, the road of reclaiming voice, transparency, and the right of Africans to be themselves. If you have ever heard the evening news in your parents' kitchen, remember that feeling. If you have ever lit a candle for someone lost, light one for Alino. And if you believe a single story can change how a nation sees itself, then share this story. With all the dignity and sincerity you have, hit like if you believe justice must be spoken for. Subscribe so you don't miss the untold stories of Africa, and leave a comment. What do you think is the greatest message from the story of Alino Faso? This is History and Legacy, Africa. Burkina Faso, Alino Faso, Africa Full.